This is a fairly long story by my own account, but I encourage you to stick with me. So, a few years back, a 25-year-old female, boyfriend's dad's family decided to get together and all chip in to rent a condo in Ontario, Canada, for the purpose of getting the entire family together. There's a big extended family up there that his dad never really got a chance to see because he only really got along with one of his 3 sisters. My boyfriend's mom talked my boyfriend into going, and they let me tag along because I'd been around long enough that they liked me and trusted me. I can't remember where everyone else had gone. I think it was maybe to the beach for what was likely the 3rd time that day. At this point, it was just me and my boyfriend at the condo, because we were kind of sick of the beach and just wanted to do nothing in the shade for a while. We were sitting outside the house, looking over at the water, just sort of talking about life. At this point of the game, I fashioned myself as quite the nerd and a rather large child. So I had just finished reading the Harry Potter series, and I remember discussing that with my boyfriend for a bit, when all of a sudden, this woman ambles out of the brush beside the condo. Just for an idea, this condo was on about an acre of land, and it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. The front of the property was probably 70 feet from a dirt road that no one really traveled down, and there were some dense trees and brush that surrounded 3 sides of it. This woman comes out of the wooded area, and I immediately know that something wasn't right. She was limping. She only had on 1 sandal, and frankly, she looked like shit. She was pale, and her face was gaunt. She was really pretty, but overall she looked exhausted. The thing that immediately caught my attention, though, was her baby, who she was holding pretty tightly in her arms as she started to make her way towards us. I didn't really know what to do, but my boyfriend immediately sprung up and walked over to her to make sure that she was all right. I couldn't help but think of all these awful things that might happen. After spending so many hours hearing these horror stories on Reddit, I was just terrified that she'd do something. My guy is a lot more trusting than I am, though, and he's always had the first instinct of, what's the problem, and how can I help? He's never really assumed the bad in anybody. So this woman is there sobbing by the time she gets to the porch of the condo, and she looks like she's been through a war zone. She's shaking, hyperventilating, crying, and telling us that basically her boyfriend has been drunk for a while, and he's been getting worse and worse. Although as she's telling the story, it doesn't sound as if there was ever a time where her boyfriend wasn't abusive. He'd get pissed whenever she was focusing on the baby instead of him, and part of what pissed him off was the fact that the kid wasn't his. So it seemed like he didn't have a care at all for the baby. She told us how this time in particular, he was drunk and she was driving him home, all with the baby strapped in the back seat. While they were driving, this man was sent into a rage. He grabbed the baby's booster seat and tore it out of the car before he threw it out the window as they were driving. Luckily, while he was floundering at trying to release the seatbelt, she was able to free her baby from the latches. So as he wound up and flung the seat from the window, she slammed on the brakes, exited the car, and took off running with her child. While she said that she never looked back, she knew that he was chasing after her. Although because he was drunk, he was more than a step slow. It's at about this point that we hear yelling, and we turn and see this angry dude walking up to the condo, and she starts to lose it. Drunk and angry, this guy had followed her all the way to the house, and he was starting to walk up on us. He was doing his best to act as if he wasn't pissed, doing the whole, "Oh, you guys found her. Thanks so much. Baby, let's go home," kind of thing. But he was slurring his speech and not doing a great job at hiding his emotions. Now, my guy has always been a pacifist. Honestly, sometimes even a bit of a pushover. He's really non-confrontational, and tries his best to find a way to talk stuff out and come to an agreement before doing anything rash. But before I could even formulate a thought, he's across the yard and approaching this belligerent guy. As much of a peace lover as he is, he's also pretty huge. He's built like a football player, 6'3", and at the time of this story, pushing nearly 240 pounds. I've known my boyfriend since we were 10, and at this time, we were 20, and we'd been dating for just over a year. I knew him better than anyone. He's never done anything like this before, but he goes up to the guy and says, "Not another step, dude." Drunk guy tries to walk around my boyfriend and goes, "No, it's okay. I'm just going to take her home." My boyfriend steps in front of him again, shakes his head, says, "You're drunk, so I'm going to pretend like maybe you didn't get what I just said, but don't come any closer." It's at this point that the guy stops trying to pretend, and he says something like, "You don't know what's going on. That's my girlfriend. I'm going to take her home." He tries rounding my boyfriend once more, and one more time my boyfriend blocks him and says, "Stop." Now, I've never heard this tone in his voice before, or since. It was scary. It wasn't him. The guy tried one more time before my boy finally put his hand up to his chest and pushed him back a bit, keeping his hand firmly placed on this man's pec. I'm telling you right now, you're not going anywhere near that girl or her child, so turn the fuck around and walk away. Drunk guy was maybe 5'6" on a good day, so when he looked up to threaten my boyfriend, he had looked like a child in comparison. He says something that I couldn't quite hear. My boyfriend said something back, and then the guy stared at him for a moment, almost as if he was deciding whether or not to do anything. My boyfriend finally pushed him away once more, and this time it made the guy stumble back. He then started pointing at me and the girl as he was saying something, before he turned around and began to walk away. I didn't learn till the next day, but the guy had told my boyfriend that he had a gun, that he was coming back, and that he'd kill him and I if we stopped him again. My boyfriend's response to this changes depending on who he's telling the story to. Originally, he told me that he told the guy that he'd feed him his own teeth, which made me laugh, because my boyfriend's a dork, and I'm pretty sure he got that line from a movie. Ever since then, the line that he tells everyone else is that he said, "I'll be waiting." The woman was sobbing. The baby was sobbing. And I was shaking because even though my boyfriend didn't throw any punches or anything like that, I could tell that he was ready to seriously hurt this guy if anything else happened. We called the police, and aside from making sure that the woman was okay, breathing, and safe, we just took her to her sister's place. We didn't really hear much from her after, but I know that my boyfriend sent her an email once or twice, and she's married now to someone else, and had another kid the last time that they spoke. Aside from this sketchy incident, I remember it being a really nice trip. We haven't made it back to Canada for a part 2 of this excursion, but my takeaway is that not all Canadians are nice. You never know who is going to stumble into your vacation rental, and you never know who you just might be helping out simply by being big, intimidating, and having a great heart. I love my guy. So I find myself here checking out similar stories, and figured I should share my own, just to see what other people's takes are, because to this day, I'm still baffled by this experience. Anyway, about 15 years ago, I was living in Austin, Texas, but had flown out to LA for the weekend. A few friends of mine put on a yearly music festival at a biker bar out around Joshua Tree. Just a relatively small thing, where most of the attendees are also musicians, and it seems like everyone knows each other. So we drink, heavily, for around 3 days or so. By the end of it, you tend to need at least a week to recover. So I was in the process of flying back to Texas, wildly hungover miserable, and completely drained. I had a flight from LAX to Dallas, then a quick hop to Austin from there. I was seated by the window for my flight, on the left side of the plane where there are only 2 seats. Next to me, in the aisle seat, was a middle-aged woman. Totally unremarkable, just your average Texan mom. We made polite small talk for a few minutes into the flight, but I really felt like doing nothing, aside from curling up in a ball against the wall and doing my best to pass out. So shortly after takeoff, I put in my headphones and started watching a movie on my iPod. You remember those. Until I drifted off to sleep. Throughout the movie though, I thought that I noticed her trying to look over my shoulder and watch the movie too, before mumbling something like, "Oh great, just ignore me." This happened several times, but I convinced myself that I was just misreading her and the situation. Eventually, I noticed her furiously scribbling in the margins of a beat-up, leather-bound book. I kept peeking over at it, seeing that the entire book was filled with unintelligible chicken scratch in pretty much every bit of available space within the margins. I also noticed that it was an Alcoholics Anonymous book. Whatever, just someone with issues. Eventually, I was able to fall back asleep. Wake up just as we land in Dallas. People start getting off the plane. But aisle seat lady makes zero effort to start packing her things up or get ready to go. She keeps sitting there, scribbling in her book. As I said, I'm intensely hungover and kind of cranky. I have no patience for anything that's prolonging the time that I have to spend on an airplane. It gets to our row, and it's her turn to move into the aisle. But again, she doesn't move at all. The rows behind us now start to leave. I finally speak up. "Hey, I've got a connection to catch, so I have to get moving here," gesturing towards the aisle and standing up. She laughs, shakes her head, before looking up at me and saying, "Oh no, you aren't going anywhere." I was so confused by this. My mind wasn't at its sharpest that day. I responded with, "Oh, I assure you, I am going somewhere. I'm getting off this plane now." She shook her head once more and said, "But you promised you'd never leave me." Now, other people who are leaving the plane are looking at this exchange, just as baffled as I am. I make eye contact with a few of them, giving that, "Can you believe this?" type of look, before edging and shoving my way out of the row saying, "Nope, certainly didn't say that." As I edged past, she sighed and said, "Well, I guess I gotta go with you then." At which point she stands up behind me, leaving her purse, book, and all her belongings on the plane, before following me out. All through the tunnel and through the terminal and up the escalator, this woman is hot on my heels, grinning like a madwoman the entire time. I'm walking fast, but she's right on me. I didn't say anything at first, and my mind kept saying, why is this happening now, of all days? I just did not want to deal with whatever the hell breakdown this woman was having, not the way that I was feeling. I eventually get to the waiting area for the monorail to the next terminal, where my connecting flight is, and she sidles up right next to me, still grinning. At this point I say, "All right, seriously, why are you following me like this?" Her response this time, "Because I love you, and you promised me you would never be apart from me." I chuckled nervously and looked around at all the strangers also waiting for the train, making sure that I had loudly announced, "No, I did not promise that. I have no idea who you are." The train arrives, I get on, and she obviously follows. Now she's trying to hold my hand. I'm moving around the monorail car, texting the girl that I was seeing at the time about what was going on, and how I'm actually kind of terrified by this woman. My phone was at 1% though, and died before I could get any sort of response. I was actually getting severely creeped out by this woman. Her eyes were completely vacant. There was just nothing but emptiness in that stare. It didn't seem as if she even blinked, coupled with her unnerving and unyielding grin. I was becoming sure that it was only a matter of time before she snapped and proceeded to stab me or shove me down an escalator or something. She's still grabbing at my hand and following me as I shove my way around the tiny train car. I announced to the other strangers, "I have no idea who this woman is. Can anyone get a hold of security?" But everyone responded with silence. Nobody else wanted to deal with this either. I felt like I was the crazy one now, making random statements to a train filled with strangers. We finally get to the other terminal. I nearly run to my gate, with her once again right behind me, still saying things like, "You can't get away from me this time." I get to the gate and spend a moment scanning the crowd. I see a woman in what looked like a police uniform waiting. I say, "Excuse me, are you security or police? See, this lady?" But she just shakes her head at me. It seems like everyone in the crowd just does their best to ignore us. You'd be amazed at how hard it is to find security or police in a damn airport these days. Finally, I make my way up to the desk and shamelessly interrupt the agent standing there. Doing my best to maintain my composure, I put on a half smile and explain to them, "Hey there, so this woman standing right next to me, I have no idea who she is, and she's been following me for quite some time." Both the agents laugh. The male one makes a comment like, "Oh, long vacation, huh? Haha. Seriously, what can I help you with?" The crazy woman laughed right along with them, rolling her eyes at my absurd assertion that I didn't know her. I chuckled, shook my head, and said again, "No, I mean it. I have no idea who this woman is." They finally saw the look of desperation in my eyes and the seriousness of my tone, and their smiles began to fade. They asked to see our boarding passes, so I handed in mine. She produced hers from her pocket as I continued explaining. This woman was on my previous flight. She even left her purse and all of her belongings on that plane. The agents speak with themselves off to the side for a moment, while I completely ignore this woman, just swatting away her hand as she tries to hold mine for the 100th time. The agents make a few quick, hushed calls, and then come back over and say, "Come with me." They immediately whisk me through the door and slam it on my pursuer, and I'm loaded onto the plane about 10 minutes before any other passenger, as a stream of staff filters by, each one offering a new apology. Eventually, the rest of the passengers get on the plane, and they all shoot me glances as they pass my row. Some of sympathy, some of sheer confusion. The man who sits behind me asks, "Hey man, what was that?" I gave him the brief version, and he tells me, "She had a complete and total meltdown the second you got on the plane. Screaming, tearing her hair out, pounding her feet. They took her away in handcuffs. You really didn't know her?" Nope, I didn't. To this day, I still wonder all the time what the hell was going on with that woman. I've barely even told any of my friends about this story, because even I find it unbelievable. I never received any other information about the incident, never learned who she was, or why she thought that I promised her anything, let alone eternal companionship and love. Even now, when I think about the look in her eyes when she said, "You promised me you'd never leave me," my skin crawls. Just so effing weird. So, I'm currently on a trip backpacking around Europe with my brother. I'm a 22-year-old female, he's a 23-year-old male, and we're currently in Paris. We're staying at this hostel, and we're in a 10-bunk bedroom. There was this one guy in the room who was immediately super weird with us. Like, as soon as we got settled, he begins talking to us about flying to Libya. He's all, "Us? Libya. Fly tomorrow. And me and my brother are just like, nah, dude, we're here in Paris for a reason. But he keeps saying it, and we keep saying no, although he's getting progressively more and more assertive about it. As me and my brother are going around doing sightseeing and stuff, I keep seeing this same guy around. When we're at the hostel, he followed us to and from the dining hall, out onto the terrace, and I find myself getting more and more creeped out with every visual of this man. My brother, ever the non-assertive soul that he is, does his best to laugh it off, as if this man is joking. This goes on for 2 days. Well, this morning, the start of the third day, we're going out to breakfast, and I happen to forget my phone back in the room. So I told my brother to go ahead, and I'll just run back to get it. As I enter the room, creepy dude is just sitting there. There's no one else in the room, and I honestly contemplated just leaving my phone. But I didn't trust it alone in the room, so I planned to just grab it quickly. Earlier in the day, the guy was still on about Libya, and essentially woke us up by bending over our beds, going on and on about it, despite us repeatedly telling him to stop talking to us. I rush in, grab my phone, when he suddenly just yells, "Libya! Now! We go now!" I'm terrified, since at this point we're the only ones in the room. But through my own horror, I'm able to get the words out, "Fuck off, dude," before I go to leave. But he blocks the door and grabs my shoulders, still going on about going to the airport and flying off to Libya. Now, don't ask me where this next part came from, but I instinctively punched this man in the throat before pushing past him and running away to where my brother and I were going to breakfast. I decided that we were going to switch rooms at that point, because this dude was officially creep level 100. We make it back to the hostel, and before we talk to the front desk, we're standing outside having a smoke, and this man shows up once again. I all but yell at him to leave us alone, to which he flat out responds, "No." I head to the front desk and explain that this dude has been harassing us and that we wish to change rooms. I mention what went down in the room, and before I knew it, the cops had been called and I was giving a statement. As they were sorting it out, there were a couple of things that jumped out at me. 1. This guy didn't pay in advance. Normally, when you're staying in a hostel, you pay the full amount up front, or if you happen to be staying for a while, you'll pay weekly. But he was paying by the day. And 2, he had several pieces of identification in his wallet, but none of which matched his description. Apparently, Paris has been having a problem with human trafficking. This guy was escorted out of the hostel by police, and he was banned from staying there ever again. My brother and I were able to switch rooms, and we were given vouchers for free dinners for the rest of our stay, so all was not lost. But now, I find that I'm a bit terrified to go out by myself while I'm in a foreign country. I swear, if it had been me and that guy, alone in a more secluded place that didn't have cameras everywhere, I could have very easily been shipped off to Libya, a destination that sure as hell isn't on my itinerary.